My name's Kevin Fraser. I was born in Elsham, in a prefab. I went down the pit when I was 18. I worked at Snowdown and then moved from Snowdown to Tilmingston until Tilmingston closed in 1986, was it, when Tilmingston closed? I'm not sure, 86, 87. I didn't want to become a coal miner. No, my dad was a miner. He came from Scotland to work in the pits. And I've got 3 brothers, and he told us that he didn't want any of us working down the pit. And I went and worked in a factory when I was 16, when I left school at Elsham. And my mates went down the pit. They was earning a lot more money than me. So one day I just wandered down to Snowdown, went in there and said, any jobs? He said, yep, there's plenty of jobs, mate. When can you start? I said, whenever. When I come from a very poor background. My dad was an alcoholic. Yeah, we had nothing. Elsham was a poor place and we was poor in Elsham. Yeah, but I had a good upbringing because I was born in a village where we was basically all lived the same way. We didn't really know much. The centre of our world was that village. I didn't want to go down the pit. My dad said to me when I come back and told him I got a job, I said to Ivor earlier that I went down there and he said, yeah, when can you start? I said, any time. He said, right, I'll give you a medical now. He told me, take your top off, breathe in, breathe out. You're fine. You can start. I'll come down to Betsanger and done 4 weeks basic training down at Betsanger and then went to Snowdown. But no, I never wanted to work down the pit. I never wanted to be a miner. I went to Elsham School, which was a very sort of like rough, shit school really, but it closed. Yeah, so I wasn't that educated at the time. I had some CSEs. I just sort of and I still do, just sort of live for the day, see what happens. I don't make plans too often. And then I went down the pit. But, yeah, I ended up at Snowdown. And then I was moved from Snowdown to Tilmingston. They were going to develop this new seam, so they reduced the amount of miners that were working at Snowdown. So they cut, I think about 75%, 80% of the miners at Snowdown went to either Tilmingston or Betsanger. And you had a choice, you could go to either. Tilmingston was the nearest, so I went to Tilmingston. Scargill come out and said there was a hit list of 200 collieries they were going to close. The government of the day denied that was going to happen. But most people knew that the writing was on the wall, that they were going to shut down the pits. So I think, it built up, and then we all went and had a meeting and a show of hands, as you did in them days. You didn't sort of hide behind a ballot. You just put your hand up and said, this is what I think. And we had a vote, and it was unanimous that we joined this strike. I think it was Corton Wood, wasn't it? I think one of the first pits that was in Yorkshire. Was it Corton Wood? I think was was a catalyst, and then it sort of like snowballed. And we had a meeting I can remember this, we had a meeting up at the welfare in Elsham on a Sunday afternoon, and we said, right, we want you to go to Yorkshire, to Barnsley. So we got in a car and drove to Barnsley on that Sunday. It was the time they closed the Dartford crossing. We went to the Dartford crossing. There was me and 3 other guys in a car. And I said to the guy, if I just we say we're going to Southend. And we got to the tunnel. There was a lot of police there. The guy stuck his head in and said, where are you going? And this guy, he panicked, the driver. He said, I'm going that way. He said, what? He said, where'd you come from? He went, oh, that way. He said, you're miners, aren't you? And he went, yes. And he was a high-ranking police official. He said, I don't want to do this, but I've got orders to tell you cannot pass through the Dartford crossing today. He said, but if you go round into London through the Blackwall Tunnel, there is no police there and you can carry on your way. When we got to Yorkshire, we stayed in a working men's club in Barnsley. I remember sleeping on a table. And in the morning, we went from there, we went to different areas of the country where they were still working. And we went to the Leicestershire coalfield and picketed a pit called Bagworth. I always remember this. We was there and it was freezing. We slept in the car outside this pit and it was frosty and cold. It was really cold. And we got out, and when the guys were coming in for the shift in the morning, they were just walking past us, and we said, "Come on, we're on strike." He said, "No, we're not NUM. We're power workers." That's what I don't know what the fuck is power workers. I don't know what that is. So we went there, and at first they let us in their canteen to get a cup of tea and that, and something to eat. But then there was some sort of like shouting and a bit of arguing and that, and it got a bit fractious. So they told us we couldn't use the canteen, and we picketed this place. And when we stayed with some activists in Leicester for a few weeks, and then they came out on strike eventually, I believe, and then we moved back down to Kent. We was being put up by people, by activists who supported the miners' sort of struggle. So you was put up in a house, and they would look after you, and then you go to a picket, and then go somewhere else. But then we went back down to Kent, and then we moved from Kent to London. And I remember then we spent 6 months. We went to Woolwich, and we stayed in the Woolwich Labour Party. We was looked after by activists from Woolwich, and we then picketed a oil-fired power station called Belvedere in Kent. And we went out there and used to go there every morning, stand out there, put our hands up, have a flag, wave them down, and they all just went through. Basically told you to fuck off as you was going through. Because everything had been sorted then. There was no one going to work in Kent at all until about 6 months into the strike. So what happened then? We was in London, and we were told that on the Monday morning, they were going to have people going back to Tilminstone Colliery, which is the first of the 3 pits in Kent where miners went back. So on that morning, we went from London, come down from London about 2 o'clock in the morning, got outside of Tilminstone Colliery, and we had a big picket. And when they had a bus come through with these scabs coming through, and we all tried to stop it, and they arrested lots of us. So I was arrested, taken round the back of the pit. I was cable tied, stood against a wall. Metropolitan police officers were there, and Kent police. And there was a Metropolitan police officer, called a Kent police officer over, told him to stand beside me, got a Polaroid camera, the old cameras which had the little photos come out, took a picture, stand beside him, took a picture of us, give the photograph to the policeman, and said, "You arrested him." Because obviously they don't want to keep coming down to these little magistrates' courts to go with all these different, because they arrested about 100 people that morning. So we were taken to Ramsgate police station and released about 4 hours later. So then I was arrested again at Snowdown, because a few months later, people started going back to Snowdown. And then I was arrested again for breach of the peace. And I had a court order saying that I wasn't allowed within half a mile of any colliery in Britain. But I got arrested a few more times. And then I got arrested and was put in prison. So you were picketing outside of a coal mine at Snowdown Colliery, and then you would be pushing, and then there would be this sort of like, they would let you go through, and then they would start arresting you. And I always remember having this argument with this one. He was one of the top officers in the Surrey police force, and Surrey police was outside of Snowdown. And I said, "You've got to control your guys, because they're just indiscriminately hitting people." "Oh, I don't agree with you. And the following morning, there was this sort of like, they decided to arrest people. And I can remember running down the road, and I got beside this guy. I said, "Can you see what's happening?" This high-ranking police officer. And there was a sergeant standing beside him, and he punched me in the face. And he just totally ignored it. There was a police station in Elsham. I come up from the pub one night, and there was snowballs. It was a really snowy night, and there was people had thrown snowballs all over the police station, and it was marked in it because it was freezing cold, and they hadn't melted or anything. They'd been there for days. We went by, and I think I was with 2 girls and my brother and a friend, and someone threw a snowball at the police station, and these policemen came out. We just walked away. They got hold of me and said, "You're being arrested for breach of the peace." So I didn't do anything. I just put my hands down. They were trying to handcuff me. Oh no, Yeah, they handcuffed me, and then the two of them had hold of me, and one of them decided to start punching me. And I put my hand in my chest, and then I put my hand, because I'm not going to retaliate, because if you retaliate, just make it worse. Anyway, I noticed blood starting coming down the front of my clothes, and I thought, I'm not having this. So I decided to attack them back. So consequently, I had a fight with these 4 policemen. I was put into the police station and put in a cell. And I was there for about 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and a crowd had gathered outside because they knew that I was with my brother. He had been arrested as well. We was inside that police station, and they were starting throwing stones and stuff at the police station. So they made a decision that it was too dangerous to keep me there, to move me to Dover. Well, by then I'd been quite badly beaten, because I'd been punched and that, and I'd been handcuffed, so I couldn't really retaliate too much. And then one of the guys, the policeman behind, when they were taking me down across this little bit of grass into the police station and into the cells, every time, every few seconds, he'd hit me over the head with a truncheon, and then I'd sort of lose consciousness, and then get back up, go a few more steps, and he'd do the same again. So by the time we got into the cell, and we'd been there for about 30 or 40 minutes, I was in a bit of a mess, I cuts all over my face and head injuries and stuff. And so the police, I remember this, the sliding door opened of the cell, and he said to me, Kevin, you're going to be taken to Dover now. You can either come the easy way or the hard way. And I said, I'll take the hard way. And as I said that, the door burst open, and a lot of them came in and tried to get hold of me, and I just fought best I could. I was put into a squad car. There was a van load of police, a squad car, a van load of police, a squad car, and my brother in, and a van load of police to take 2 of us to a police station for a breach of the peace, right? So you've got about 50 or 60 police officers. We drive out of Elsham, and they're goading me. There's 4 policemen in the car. Well, there was a policewoman and 3 policemen, and they're goading me. And my mouth was cut, so I had a lot of blood in my mouth. So I just, and I spat at the back of the policeman's head in the back of this car, who was driving the police car. And I said, if you carry on, I said, every time you open your mouth, I will do the same to all of yous. And so they didn't say a word until we got to Dover. He was nearly crying, this driver of this car, because it had gone all over his car, all this blood and snot. When we got to Dover police station, they got me out of the car. One of them got me in a neck hold, one got me round the waist, one got me round the legs, so they had me, and then they got me into the front of the car where I'd spat. I had hold of my hair and was trying to wipe the blood with my hair, which I wasn't too bothered about it. When we got into the police station, I then grabbed the bars as they was putting me into cells. I said, I want to see a doctor before you lock me into that cell. No. So then they was hitting my hand with truncheons to try and get my hand off the bars, and I wouldn't let go. So then the sergeant who was in charge of the cells come along. He walked through this door and he said, what's going on? He said, we're trying to get him in the cells. And he said, I'm not having him in the cell. Oh, look at him. He said, I want him to see a doctor before he's put in them cells, because I'm responsible for that person when he goes in them cells. So they got a doctor. And this Indian doctor came and examined me. And then I was put in to the cells for a couple of days, and then I was taken to court and I was refused bail. And I went to court every couple of weeks and I was refused bail because they said there was a likelihood that I may commit a similar offence. So consequently, the strike finished. Everyone went back to work and I'm still stuck in Canterbury prison waiting for this trial. And I went to trial 4 months later, I spent in prison. And the strike, everyone had gone back. They marched back to their, you've seen all this stuff here where they all gone back with their banners, all head held high. and I'm stuck in Canterbury prison. I go to this trial in Rochester Crown Court, and I'm charged with grievous bodily harm, assault. I don't know. There was 3 or 4 charges, and I had 4 policemen who I'd allegedly assaulted. I was charged with assaulting 4 policemen, and the first policeman came in, and he's got his arm in a sling, right? He broke his arm that night when we were wrestling around, but he tried to say I deliberately broke his arm, which was a load of rubbish. He slipped over in the snow and broke his arm. So I was charged with assaulting this sergeant, grievous bodily harm on this sergeant. And he'd had this was 4 months, and he's got his arm in a sling still. The next one came in, and he's got this big neck collar on, right? And I'm just thinking to myself, God, they're going to wheel one in a wheelchair in a minute. What's going on? During cross-examination, this guy, he tried to say it was me who did it. During cross-examination, he said, no, it was an old injury. It flared up recently. That's why he's got the collar on. In front of a jury. My only witness, the only thing I said, right, was my name and my age, right? I think that's when they asked you are so-and-so, so-and-so. That is, yep, that's my name. And then I had a doctor who came to examine me in Dover Police Station as my only witness. And it was him. He stood up in the box and said, yeah, he was badly beaten. He was hit over the head with a blunt instrument. He had a broken nose, a fractured cheekbone, and concussion and head injuries, right? So I've got all this. So the 4 policemen who were in this court are all saying that none of them had touched me. And so my barrister saying, well, how did he get these injuries? How did it happen? And none of them would admit that they'd even pushed me. So it went on for 3 days, this trial. And it's not, obviously you can say it was the miners' strike. So because this jury is supposed to not know, but they all knew, they know, there was not said that what was going on, why I was there. And at the end, so they come out, and he wanted a unanimous decision, this judge. I don't know if you've ever been into a court and you've listened to a judge summing up, right? And in our legal system, a judge summing up is supposed to be impartial. Well, this judge was basically telling this jury, forget about what's happened to him. Just remember how these policemen have suffered. Forget all the lies that they've said, but just, he's guilty, basically. And you're thinking, God, what a stitch up this is. So he wanted a unanimous decision. I went down to the cells, come back up again, and then there was a majority. It was 11-1, and he asked them to go back again and see if he can get a unanimous decision.
Against you?
Against me, yeah. No, 11-1, not guilty. Right, not guilty. And I always remember there was one woman in the front of this jury who had this little pill box and that, you could tell she hated me. And she just stared at me with like this hate all the way through it. And I knew when 11-1, it was her. And, so I went back down to the cell, my barrister came in and said, Kevin, he said, this judge in his summing up has proved that if you get found guilty, he's going to give you the maximum, which will be up 3 to 5 years. You're going to get in prison if you're found guilty. So I'm like shitting myself. You know what? All I've done was got beat up. And then they come back out and they said, right, there was a unanimous decision, 11-1, not guilty. And I was found not guilty.
And the court accepted that.
This judge just went, you may go, like that, right? And I stood up, I said, I beg your pardon? He said, you may go. I said, what about these 4 policemen who've told all these lies? And then my barrister, you've got a solicitor there and a barrister here. And my solicitor's going, Kevin, sit down. And he said, be quiet. This judge said, be quiet. He said, I'll charge you with contempt of court. And I said, but what happens? I've just spent 4 months of my life in prison for nothing. And he just said, go. And they were saying, come on, we'll go. You're free. Come on, let's get out of here. And I went back to Elsham. And on the week, I went back to the pit. And with one of the guys, there's a picture of him upstairs, sat in with the manager of the pit. And he said, have you got any outstanding charges? I said, no. Have you been found guilty of anything? I said, no. And And he said, right, you can start back tomorrow. I said, no, I'll come back Monday. This was on a Thursday, I think. I said, I'll come back tomorrow. I'll come back Monday. And I was given £3 because you used to get £3 a day for picketing. If you didn't picket, you didn't get your money. And I got £3 for every day I spent in prison, which I thought was really good of the guys at the village, you know, of the committee and that. But during, so I'm in prison. So I've got to go to court, to Sandwich Magistrates Court, for this being arrested outside Tilmanston Colliery by a Metropolitan policeman. So
This is another charge.
this was the one I told you about, where I've been arrested outside Tilmanston Colliery on the first day that Kent miners went back scabbed. I'm in prison, and during that time in prison, I have to go to this court case for this other charge. So I'm in prison being charged with this more serious charges. So I went to Sandwich with 2 prison officers. They took me from Canterbury to Sandwich, from Canterbury prison, to sit there in the magistrates' court at the Guildhall at Sandwich and face these charges of a breach of the peace, because I got arrested outside of Tilmanston Colliery. And this policeman who didn't arrest me, this Kent policeman, is reading his notes. So at this time, right, I have got nothing to lose. I don't give a fuck about anything, right? I'm in prison. What's the worst can happen? So every time he stood up and got his notebook out and started making up this story about how he arrested me. So every time he said something, I said, that's not true. And the magistrate was going, please, you get your chance to talk. Be quiet. I said, no, I'm not going to be quiet. And the 2 prison officers who were beside me, they're laughing. They were laughing because, you know. So he carried on and he started to break. His face had gone red. And I thought, he's going to tell them he didn't arrest me. He's going to tell them. Anyway, did he? They just said, right, the prosecution said we need to adjourn for a few minutes. They adjourned, come back 5 minutes later and said, there is no charges. I said, no, I want him to tell you that he didn't arrest me. I said, he had a big red badge on, Kent policeman. The guy who arrested me was about 6 inches taller than him, had a big silver badge on his Metropolitan Police helmet. I said, I knew it wasn't him who arrested me. He's just lying. And they were going, off you go, you got to go, you got to go. And I always remember coming out of there and these 2 prison officers said, yeah, you're right, mate. And they were really friendly to me. They said, look, we can take the handcuffs off. You're not going to run. I said, no, of course not. He said, look, we're going to go and get some lunch. You want to come for lunch with us? And I went for lunch with them before I went back to prison. But yeah, and then before that, so before that had happened, I'd been to Orgreave on the Battle of Orgreave Day.
The 18th?
Yes, I was there that day as well. So the funny thing was, right, so we were told we were just going to be this mass picket at Orgreave at this coking plant. We got a map out, me and my mates, because you didn't have phones and sat-nav and all that stuff. We ended up going to a place called Orgreave in Devon. And I can remember at night, we're driving around this little villages, and I stopped and asked them, do you know, is there a coking plant here? And they go, no. So we rung up back someone in Elsham and said, we're at Orgreave, where is this place? He said, whereabouts are you? I said, we're in Devon. He said, it's Orgreave in Yorkshire. That was a strange day as well, yeah.
The judge, take you back to the day when the judge says you can go. And your barrister was telling Kevin to sit down. Obviously, there's that thing about contempt of court. What was you feeling when you actually left that court? Was you angry?
Very angry. Very angry. Because I hadn't done anything really. I hadn't done anything wrong. I was just arrested. And there was, do you know in 1981, do you know there was the Brixton riots and that? You had this group of police called the Special Patrol Group, SPG, right? You had them. And they was in our village. It weren't just up in London. It wasn't just in the cities and that. They was in these villages as well. No, this was in 81. This was before. So during the strike, when the strike started, right, I used to tell the guys, there was people who are now my age now, who would tell you that the police were really upstanding citizens and they would never had any contact with the police. I had, and I knew what they were going to be like. And I used to tell these guys, be careful because they're not what they seem, these people. And they wasn't. And it shocked a lot of these people because none of these people in that village had been in trouble with the police. That's what politicised me, was seeing that. I've always been someone who didn't like, the reason I got into trouble with that a lot was because I don't like bullies. And I just didn't like the way, and if there were bullies in a uniform, they were no different. They were still bullies, and I hated bullies.
So
I hated people pushing people about.
So Kevin, so the judge has just said to you, you can go. How did that make you feel?
Well, I was relieved, obviously, because I'd just been told by my barrister that if he finds me guilty, if I get found guilty, I'm going to get 3 to 5 years in prison. So I was relieved, but also angry because I knew that I hadn't done anything. I'd been beaten by 4 policemen and then stuck in prison for 4 months and then had to sit there, listen to all this bullshit and then be told I'm not guilty. And I walked out there. So I was angry, very angry.
What's the...
Oh, and the funny thing was, right, in Rochester Crown Court, you go down and there's these like big sort of steps. You go down with like a landing on the level. And when I came down the steps, right, the jury, 11 of them, were standing there. And as I come down the steps, they clapped me. They clapped me. They stood there and applauded.
How did that make you feel? Emotional?
Of course it did. But, you know, what it made me feel that people knew what was going on. They knew things were wrong. They knew all this shit was happening. I lived in a house where my dad was a miner. My mum didn't work. I worked down the pit and my brother was a miner. All right. So we had no income apart from like, social security that my mum got. So for that, most of that year, basically, we used to go up to the welfare and get a bag of food and it was given. And the one thing that I will say, right, that it's not the miners. We were just put in, like, it's just like soldiers in a war. You don't volunteer, it just happens. You're just there at that occasion. It's the people who are behind you, the activists, the people who are going out of their way and in their own time collecting food and collecting money and that, and you know, that support from them people. You know, I didn't know about Marx, Trotsky, Lenin, all this stuff. And
so
that
you wasn't
not at all. Not at all. No, I just wanted to go out and have a laugh and have a drink and that with my mates. But what it did do, you'd sit with people, these activists, and you'd listen, you know, and you'd go. I spent 6 months in London, and every night we was going to a meeting somewhere. We was going to some event where people were supporting you and giving you money. And at weekends we'd go collecting, you know, Deptford Market or something. You know, you go collecting with a bucket and that, you know. But yeah, what it did do to me, it opened my eyes. I knew there was injustice in the world. We did, because I come from a poor area with poor, you know, where you were pushed around and that. You were sort of never given the proper chances that other people got and that. So I always had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, you know. And unfortunately, we've had this sort of like, over the last few years, in Nelsham and these areas, right, where you have got working class people who have got fuck all, right, who have now sort of like gone from being left wing to right wing because they've been sort of like brainwashed into thinking that all their ills are someone else's fault and not the government's fault, not the system's fault that's let them down. You blame somebody else, and we know who we've got to blame. You know, you've got these people have to blame.
How do you change that perception?
How? Well, I educate people. Do you know, I don't think, do you know, and I'd had this argument at work. We've just gone through a 2-year, well, it's not finished yet, just over a 2-year dispute. And the train drivers, right, they're a funny bunch of people, right? They're not, you know, I can remember starting there and thinking, hey, these are strange, aren't they? And it's hard to sort of like impress people on trade unionism, supporting a trade union, being in a trade union, because it's alien to a lot of people. I think it's education. And it needs activists. It needs people to be in workplaces like yourself, and saying, you know, come on, this is rubbish.
How has it affected your life, what you've been through? And what memory do you hold? Do you hold the most? And
What about that year?
yeah,
Well, it was an eye-opener. I got to see people, meet people, and you saw the actual love and compassion that people gave you,
humankind.
and the sort of almost sort of like hero worship with some of them, thinking you were some sort of like working class hero, which none of us were really. You know, we were just miners who were working. We were going to close our pit, so we stuck our hands up and said we'll go on strike. But here's my abiding memory of it. At the end of it, right at the end of the strike had finished, these pits were being closed, and we had a meeting at Elvington Working Men's Club, Elvington Village Hall, I think it was, where we had a vote to keep our pit open or to go into, to close the pit or go into this review procedure. They were very clever. What the government did, they said, if you go into the review procedure, which could take 6 months or more, you may not get the redundancy payments that were on offer at the time. So anyone who was over the age of about 45, who had done their years down the pit, wanted to go, thinking that I don't want to lose that redundancy money. It was pretty petty anyway. It wasn't much. And we had a meeting in Elvington Club, and they had the local news was outside, the TV, Meridian News was outside with their cameras waiting for the result. And I always remember this. I said, what they want, and I said this, what they want you to do is to to go on the news and say they voted to close their pit. Because if you don't go into the review procedure, that's what we're doing. And we had a show of hands. And I remember it started getting heated. And so they closed the doors to stop the cameras from coming in, to stay in this big hall with about 400 or 500 guys. And they put you in bush. Who wants to go into the review procedure? Young lads like me stuck our hand up, right? And I had people who I live with, friends and that, were telling me to put my fucking hands down, get your hands down, swearing at me, getting aggressive. Then someone threw a chair at the stage with the committee, and it was like a little football match scuffle started happening, a bit of a fight going on. And that's the abiding memory that sticks with me, right? That we then went out and we'd voted to close that pit because, and I understand the guys who wanted to do redundancy. I understand what leverage was going on with them. You're saying if you voted to go in that review procedure, you're not going to get this redundancy. And these people thinking, well, I want my money. You know, it's just a natural thing for people to do this. But then going back into the village and going to the shop, so I wouldn't buy the Sun newspaper, I wouldn't buy any right-wing newspapers. They called us a scum of the earth. And I would try to tell people like that. I'd go into the shop and I'd see a guy who worked at the pit picking a Sun up. I said, what are you doing, mate? He said, oh, my wife does it. Well, she wants to do bingo. It's the bingo. Fuck off. So and then I would bump into people and they would say, it's a good job, innit? It was a good job, wasn't it? It was a good job, really. I say, you put your hand up. I saw you put your hand up. And it became there was a lot of animosity. And it is a story, right? About 5 years later, we're driving a train. No, about 10 years later, I'm driving a train. And I get to Cannon Street, and I'm walking up the other end to take the train empties back to Faversham or somewhere. And this guy walks past me and went, Kevin, all right. And I went, oh, hello, mate, how you doing? Yeah, and he was walking, he was going to work, he was building work or something, he was with a couple of guys. And as I walked past him, I got to the front of the train, I thought, I think that bloke went to work, he's scabbed during the miners' strike. So I waited for weeks. I'm doing my trains, and then one day I'm on this job, get to Cannon Street, I'm walking down the end, he's walking down the platform towards me. And he went, hello, Kevin. I said, Alan, innit? He said, yeah. I said, you worked in the miners' strike, didn't you? And he put his head down, he went, yes, very quietly. I said, Alan, I said, if I see you or you see me again, don't talk to me because I'm not going to talk to you. I said, just keep walking. I don't want to speak to you. And I just walked past him. The two guys he was with obviously weren't miners or anything. They didn't know what was going on. But he just nodded his head and just carried on. Never, ever saw that guy or saw him look at me or speak to me ever again. Yeah. So it runs deep, a lot of this stuff.
Staying.
Do you know, we in Kent, we went 2 weeks further than the rest of the country.
It's been acknowledged as well.
People, now I didn't see this because I was in prison, but people, my mates, would go up to that working men's club, and people who had been on strike for a whole year, and Scargill has said, you all go back to work, it's all finished. They started going back, some of them. They was considered scabs. In my eyes, I don't think they were. I don't think they were. The strike had finished. It was all over. It was done. And I can remember them being in the working men's club on a Friday night or something, walking through this corridor, and my mate's in front of me. This bloke walks the other way, and my mate just knocked him out. And I said, what was that for? He said, he scabbed. I said, no, he didn't. He said, he come back about, that last 2 weeks, he went back. And I said, I don't know. How far do you take it? How far do you take it? You're not going to get anywhere with hate, are you, anymore? But I wouldn't. We got scabs now at work, so, I would not. The only time I'll talk to them is if I'm...
Professional capacity.
No, I'm being nasty to them. Not in a professional. I won't deal with them. They're not as ASLEF rep. They are not my concern because they are not members of our trade union. They are non-members who decided to break our strike. And I said to one last week, I said, how do you feel getting what I'm going to get? I said, we've been on strike for 2 years. We've lost a couple of £1,000. I said, you've lost a penny. I said, but you're going to gain everything that we've fought now we've got when this deal is done.
One last question, Kevin. You joined the miners community at the age of 18. Mm-hmm.
Well, I wasn't. I was born into it because my dad was a miner when I was born.
What would you say to the Kevin today, to the Kevin at 18 years old?
Do you know what? If it had happened today and I had the knowledge that I've got now and the experience, I think I wouldn't have lasted that 9-10 months before I was in prison. I think I'd have been in there a lot quicker because I still think you don't shit on your friends. You don't sit on your colleagues. You don't shit on your colleagues. Sorry. No. But I think it was character building for me. I've done all right in life. I've got a nice family, a wife, a nice house. I've done all right. I've worked hard,
Do your kids know your history?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Be proud.
I am.
Very proud.
I am, yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you know, and also I can do it in this job as well because I'm a trade unionist and I've never done anything that has gone against what I believe in.